Just wanted to say a few extra words. Last night I posted a short on my channel about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. My sister was in the crowd. I believe some of her daughters were there as well when it happened. I have a number of family living in Utah, and they were all very much shook up from this, and I haven't spoken much on this channel about my views on the last days and the unfolding of events that are coming. I think my short that I released last night was the first time I actually made a direct commentary on that. Even when reading through the standard works, I've tried to avoid making direct commentary on what I think is going to happen. But I will say that for most of my life, I have been told that there was a prophecy or a statement made. I think it said to be made by President Benson back in the 80s, but it could have been, President Kimball or President Joseph F. Smith, Joseph Fielding Smith, I don't know. I've not been able to verify the quote. It's just something that I've always been told by my family. And the quote goes something like this: that if you want to know how the events of the last days are going to play out, read the events in the first 7 or 8 chapters of the book of 3rd Nephi. Because the events of 3rd Nephi are going to be repeated in America in the last days. Now, as I say, I cannot verify that this was ever a quote. I've asked my family about it in recent years, and the best they can give me is quotes saying to learn from 3rd Nephi or learn from the scriptures. So this specific idea that the last days in the United States will repeat or mimic the events of 3rd Nephi, I can't verify. But I will say that the more I read of prophecy in scripture, as well as things prophesied in the words of prophets, I have come to think that most likely it is accurate, that the events of 3rd Nephi will repeat. Now, of course, they can't be exactly, because we don't have the same government, and we don't have the same society as the Nephites did. We have a very similar society, very much a republic society, but the Nephite legislature was the people. They did not have an elected legislature. They had elected judges, and the chief judge was, in effect, the executive as well as the judicial in their government. The lesser judges were also the executive and judicial in their areas. Some of the executive powers were invested in the chief captains, especially from the time of Captain Moroni and on. But the highest executive authority was the chief judge, or sometimes referred to as the governor. As much as we can tell, that there were not all members of the Nephites, not all the Nephites were members of the church. The church was strong, and the leaders of the Nephites were members of the church, and most of them were prophets. But not all of the Nephites were believing members, were believing saints. They weren't all part of the Gadian robbers either. They weren't all in these conspiracies, but they weren't all faithful saints. But even the unfaithful had the habit, as it says, the people would elect judges and leaders who were men of God, who were prophets. And in 3rd Nephi, the 2 government leaders that we read about primarily were Laconius, who was the chief judge, and Gidgiddoni, who was the chief captain. Both of them are said to be prophets. In the United States, we don't have this. We have a division of government. We have an elected legislature, an elected executive, and an appointed judiciary. And because our government was not established by the church, like the Nephites was, remember King Mosiah, he's the one that established the government that existed in 3rd Nephi. He established it 150 years earlier. But he was a righteous king and prophet. He was a seer, able to translate, use the seer stones, use the Urim and Thummim, and he established the government according to the principles of the gospel. The United States was not established in this way. It was inspired by God, don't get me wrong. The Constitution is, in my opinion, scripture. It is a holy document. But it was still not established by the church. It is not a church government, while the Nephites had a church government in effect. So the prophets that we read about in 3rd Nephi are prophets. They are men of God going out. In the modern day, the prophets that are sent by God are not necessarily going to be in the church. Now, if they're speaking directly for God, they're going to be in the church. God's not going to call a prophet who does not hold his priesthood. But he will inspire men to speak out the truth, to speak against evil. And in the last 10, 15 years, we have had many men who have arisen in our society to speak out against evil. Charlie Kirk was one of the best. But you also have Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, Donald Trump himself. These are all great men, and I believe they were all inspired and, in effect, sent by God to declare the wickedness of our country, of our society in the modern day, just as the prophets were sent out in 3rd Nephi. In 3rd Nephi, the prophets were killed. They were murdered by the lesser judges, or the lower courts, you might say. Now, among the Nephite government and society, these would have been the elite people, not just the rulers, but the elites. And it doesn't say, it says they were put to death by the judges, yes, but it doesn't say that the judges personally killed them. And so we can infer that they were assassinated by those, not by the judges personally, but under the judge's orders. Then you had the governor step in, and he arrests these lower judges who gave the order. He starts trying to clean up the corruption in government, and that is when the governor, is murdered. Now this is not Laconius I. Laconius and Gidgiddoni, they were in the beginning of 3rd Nephi during the war against the Gadian robbers. When Laconius I dies, his son becomes the chief judge. And in his first year, he arrests and sentences to death a number of these lesser judges who are involved in these conspiracies. That is when he is assassinated and the government collapses. But the conspiracy starts to put down the prophets, and then it escalates to the destruction of the government. But it all starts in the government, and I think we are seeing that. And I think we have that this assassination of Charlie Kirk marks the beginning of the murder of the prophets that will eventually culminate in the assassination of the chief judge and the collapse of the government. Now, who the chief judge is a matter of some speculation, and I'm not going to mention anything about that at this time, but I think we are seeing 3rd Nephi playing out again. The death of the prophets have begun. I think we will see more political assassinations. And as the administration of Donald Trump cracks down and hunts down these evil, despicable people, those in government who support them will rise up and destroy the government itself until there is a complete collapse, and we are divided into all manners of ites, just as happened among the Nephites. Now remember, that collapse of the Nephites happened 3 years, or about 3.5 years, before the death of Christ, in which the wicked are destroyed, and then Christ comes and visits the Nephites. I think we have entered the beginning phase. We have a short period before the collapse happens. Once the collapse happens, we are going to have a number of years of utter chaos and turmoil. And then Zion will rise. We have the destruction of the wicked and the return of Christ. That's just a brief overview of what I think is coming. I don't usually do these kind of videos, but I felt impressed that it needed to be put out there. So I think we have just entered the final tribulation.